Have you ever wondered what code coverage is in the context of Apex programming language? Or maybe you've run into a situation where you're trying to push some package, some change set to production, and you get a code coverage error, and it won't let you push to production until you've got your coverage up above 75%. Well, if you've ever been in either of those situations, or just wondered what the hell code coverage is all about, that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're just going to jump right in to a sample class that I've created called the string utils. The purpose of this class is to, aside from being an example, it's just got two methods in it. This method, and we won't go into the details of how all this is working, although this first one's pretty simple. So safe string basically takes in a string, and if it's null, well, if it's not null, it'll just return the string. And if it is null, it'll return an empty string. Functions like this are useful when you're, if you've got to do lots of string processing in, let's say, another class, and you don't want to keep checking for null every time you do that. You can just wrap it in a method like safe string. And then we made another method here, method or function. I use those words interchangeably. We've got a method here called random string, where you pass in the length, let's say 10 characters, and it'll just generate a random string out of the uppercase and lowercase alphabet and digits. So pretty simple, just generates a random string based on whatever we pass into it. So anytime we have a class in Apex, we are expected to write unit tests to test that functionality. Salesforce imposes a restriction on any code that we push to production from a sandbox that your code coverage has to be above 75%. So let's take a look at what that actually means. And what we'll do is we'll start by simply creating a test for this class. So create a new class. A naming convention that I've seen in lots of shops is you simply use the existing class name and you append test to the end of it. And for a test class, we need to give it the isTest annotation. For a test to be useful, we're going to need to create, so this is simply the class definition. We need to create a test inside of it. And again, we do that by creating a method, and that also receives the isTest annotation. We can call this method anything we want. It's a good idea to have the name of the method represent what it's actually doing or what it's actually testing. That way, later, if we get an error or need to do some troubleshooting, it'll tell us what it's trying to do, and that'll help us with whatever it is we're trying to fix down the road. So testing safe string is pretty straightforward. So here, and I'm not going to go into the details of what asserts are. I'll do a different video on that. Actually, I do have another video on that, which I'll refer you to at the end of this video. So this test is very simple. We're passing into the safe string method a null, and we expect back an empty string. So let's just save that and run it and see how it goes. So since we've given the isTest annotation, this run test button appears. So we can run it. We can see down here that it passed. We have a green checkbox. So that's great. We know this function did what we expected it to do. But what does it mean to have coverage? So here it shows how much of this class was actually covered by tests that we implemented. So if we turn it on, by default, it's showing, we're not looking at any coverage data. But if we want, we could click on all tests or individual tests. Right now, it's the same thing because we only have one. And it'll highlight which parts of the code are covered and which parts are not. So when we called safe string, we passed in a null. So we can see anything that's blue was covered and anything that's red or pink was not. So since we passed in null, it came to this logic statement. If s does not equal to null, so then it skipped over that and returned the empty string. So it's kind of cool. We can kind of see what the flow is happening through this method, and also which parts of the method we did not exercise. So passing in a null, we got an empty string. Perfect. What happens if we pass in something else? We don't know because we didn't run that test case. And so that's why this method is not 100% covered, because we didn't exercise it fully. So let's go back and do that. So another test we can do if we pass in an empty string, we also expect an empty string back. Again, we passed. And when we look at our coverage numbers, they're a little bit better. We went from 27% to 36%. And this safe string is covered completely. However, that's not the end of the story. Yes, we got the case where it's null, and we got the case where we pass in an empty string. And even though we don't need to do this next step, we really should pass in something that has an actual value. So if we pass in a string that's got the content of foo, we expect that to be returned. In a way, this is the same test as this one, but it's always good to take a couple extra steps when we're testing our code. We don't want to just achieve coverage numbers. That's a really bad idea. What we want to do is actually test that our functionality is working, and that's what this will do. And we'll run it. And again, our coverage numbers didn't increase, but our peace of mind has, right? Because we've actually exercised this a little bit more. So the rest of this class, random string, we have not tested that one yet. So that's why that's all red. So let's do a quick one on random string. So we have to think, what do we want to test on random string? So one easy test would be if we pass in a value of 0 for the length, it should return an empty string. So let's see if that's true. Again, we check to see that it passed, which it did. Always check that, because it's not always obvious when something fails. And then when we look at the coverage, we can see it. We've got most of random string covered, but we didn't hit all of it. Random string, because we passed in a 0, when it went to do this for loop, we jumped right out of the for loop because we're looking for a 0 length string. So it never needed to come in here, and just returned the empty string that was initialized here on this line. So that gives us some ideas for what the next test should be. And we're not, because it's returning a random string, we can't just compare it to foo like we did up here. So the best I think we can do is that if we say generate a random string with a length of 4, we can actually check the length and make sure that it still matches. Run the test, check the results, go back in here, check our coverage, and now we can see between the two tests, it's at 100%. We could see, well, which part is tested by safe string. and which part is tested by random string, or really mostly what we're concerned about is all of our tests together. And we've got 100% coverage. Every single line in this class is covered. So that's what coverage is. Coverage is telling us how much of this class is actually covered by the tests that we've implemented. And it's always good to shoot for 100%. That's not always possible or feasible, but it's a good goal to try to get to. If our overall code coverage is less than 75%, it is not, Salesforce will not let us push our code changes from a sandbox to production. So there we have it, an example of code coverage. If you can think of other ways we could have tested the random string function, please feel free to let me know. So one way you could implement this today is pick a piece of code in your system, run your tests, just go execute all tests, and then see what your coverage numbers are like for that test. And if you don't have a unit test for it, create one. Or if you've got an existing one, but you can see holes in your logic, try to think about ways to update that test to get those pieces of your logic exercised. And if you get stuck on that, feel free to reach out to me. You can comment on this video and I will respond to all comments. If you're looking to expand your knowledge of Salesforce, of Apex development, or if you're, let's say, an admin and you want to go down the path and learn more about Apex, I encourage you to take my questionnaire. Are you ready for Apex development? Just to see where you stand, if there's any gaps in your knowledge or things you need to focus on, or where you've already got things covered. So the link is in the description of this video, and I will see you next time.